Yeah, I was quite happy to hear yesterday's lecture by Professor Joel, as he's a pioneer of anthropology of Christianity, because my journey started 2009 at OCMS. I thought the problem that Korean missionaries had with Cambodian pastors were in the area of financial aid was a financial one. So that's how my journey began. But through the scope of social anthropology, especially Cambridge, Dr. Alan McFarlane brought me into light of understanding issue in its proper study context. So I realized that if it's a socio-anthropological issue, I should deal with it in that context, not theologically. So my paper talks about patron as father, a relational paradigm in Cambodia. This actually is the short section of my chapter 4 of my thesis, which I should be writing right now. But, I like the way you turn our session into OCMS recruitment session also, but so my research, I'm going to begin to read. My introduction of my paper is that my interview, which the research began in 2009, but one interview in 2011 ultimately changed the direction of my research. During the interview, the director of well-established Bible college in Cambodia shared that the most difficult problem his Cambodian students, now pastors, face is Korean missionaries. At one of the pastors' meetings, they decided to write a formal letter to Cambodian government to expel Korean missionaries from Cambodia. As a Korean descendant, I was not happy to hear such news. I asked for more specific reasons and requested from the director more detailed information. He then shared how one of his Bible college graduates, ministering at a remote village in Cambodia for more than 10 years, had a Korean missionary visiting his church wanting to help out with poor members of the church with monthly rice distribution. Thinking that Korean missionaries is simply engaging in mercy ministry, he allowed the rice distribution. But after several months, the Korean missionaries built a church next to his church and announced to members, Cambodian members, that if they want to continue to receive the rice distribution, they would have to come to the new church plant. According to my informant, his former students sat before him and started to weep and reported that most of his church members left to join the Korean missionaries' church. He asked, in broken English, why are Korean missionaries here? This was a turning point in my research. Up to that point, the focus of my research was one on the aid dependency issue between Korean missionaries and Cambodians. But at that moment, I realized that I had to research deeply into social, cultural, and relational issues between them. Currently, I'm engaged in a social anthropological qualitative case study research in Kampong Som Bible School in Cambodia, focusing on patron-client relationship between Moses, the Korean missionary, the founder, and his students, former students, KBS church planters. I'm Korean by birth. I left this country 1973. So I was 12, and I went to America, a city called Los Angeles, and lived there for 43 years. So using the Bishop Hwa Young's term, I am banana. I am yellow outside, but I'm white inside. So with that background, my research began at OCMS at Oxford, where I found that I don't speak English, but I speak American. So I became trilingual. And then today I found out I am the head of the ritual in Thai. So my Korean name is Seok Hwan. So with that perspective, I try to understand this dynamic between Korean missionaries and Cambodians. Because initially, when I interview Korean missionaries, they say, they have dependency issue. So interviewing only Korean missionaries, I thought Cambodian pastor had dependency issue. So I came and reported that Dr. David and all the scholars at OCMS basically said, that's not how you do research. You need to talk to the people. So I end up talking with Cambodian pastors and realized it was much more complex. It wasn't a financial issue. It was a relational issue. And I didn't know how to put my finger on, so how do I define that, this dynamic? Both in sociology and anthropology, they discussed about this since 1950s, from Eisenstadt from University Hebrew, but Muno from German suggests the following 5 key characteristics of patron-client relationship in both sociology and anthropology, of which number 1 is dyadic, number 2 is asymmetrical, number 3 is personal and enduring, 4 reciprocal, 5 is voluntary. But due to the scope of this paper, I'm just going to focus in on asymmetrical aspect of patron-client relationship, which is vertical and or hierarchical relationship. So I define, for the sake of my thesis, I define patron-client relationship in my own definition, and that is patron-client relationship in both its formal and informal setting is an arrangement between an individual of higher socioeconomic status or some other personal resources, patron, who provide support to another person or lower status client who give assistance of service in return, which is mutually obligatory and beneficial. Sokha, a Cambodian scholar, also defines the patron-client relationship of Cambodia as a formal hierarchical social relationship in which no one is considered equal to anyone else. They are all ranked by combination of variables, including but not limited to age, sex, wealth, political position, and religious piety. Ledgerwood of USA agrees that there is no equality in social relationship and holds that the Cambodian social hierarchical rankings outside the family, therefore, are invariably determined by age, wealth, political position, religious piety, and sex. Some may be critical about the form of hierarchical relationship in which no one is considered equal in Cambodia. However, this paper argues that it is not inequality that is the problem, but fairness, especially in the patron-client relationship when patron is playing the role of a father, a patron as father, PAF. There are 3 different stages that I noticed. And when I decide to do case study and interviewing many pastors, I did 97 interviews. Of that, the case study interviews of the 21 church plant that this Bible college has done, I interviewed all of them. I even went to their site and things of that nature, and then I started noticing the pattern. And the pattern is that the KBS, or Kampong Som Bible School, from 1998 to 2015, the Kampong Som Bible School transitioned from 3 major stages, whereby the role of Moses changed. First, during the missional stage, 1998 to 2002, where Moses and his wife Grace lived with several Cambodian young people in their flat. And most of these young people were displaced or orphans. They picked them up on the street, so they had no place to go. And they started living together in their house. And it's a very tiny flat. They had a communal life with these 7 young people. It is a hierarchical and yet personal relational environment. Moses' role as a patron, as a father, was a primary perception by KBS students. Then during the second stage, early KBS stage, 2003 to 2007, KBS building and dormitory were being built, and most of the mission house students were relocated. At this stage, Moses' role as a teacher and pastor stands out. And finally, when KBS student body reaches more than 100, it enters into third stage, established KBS stage, 2008 to 2015. By this time, Moses was seen as a father to some, a teacher to most, but as a sponsor to KBS graduate engaged in church planting efforts by Moses. Due to the scope of this time limitation, this conference, this paper, only going to focus on patron as father. But the stages and the language and the terminology or identification of his role all come out of the data that the interview, countless of hundreds of pages transcribed and then coded, and then the word that they use through the repetition. And I start categorizing the 7 students who came out of the mission house who constantly referred to him as father. As the people who, when the school just began, they said, Le Guru is a good teacher. That's dominant. And then when then these young people, when this teenager, after many years, now had reached his mid-30, has a church, and now he said he's our sponsor because he's the one who's sponsoring his church. So the language changed and the relational issue changed. So when I initially only saw that, well, you've been doing church for 15 years, but you're not self-sustainable, independent, something's wrong here. I had to rethink, like, oh, no, there is a progression. There is a relationship changed. So we have to see that in context. So at this paper, I'm just looking at how does he become a father, and that actually becomes a new paradigm, a mission in my perspective. Because Eisenstadt of University of Hebrews states that among the 5 patron-client relationship features, the 4th feature, which is the patron playing the role of father surrogate, is prominent specifically in Southeast Asia. Eisenstadt is a wonderful scholar who's done study on a massive scale. He identified different kinds of patron-client relationship in 29 countries. And so it's wonderful work, especially for me. But he excluded Cambodia and Korea. So that's wonderful for me too. Now I could make some contribution to the body of knowledge. But not just because it was never been done before, but his view from 1950s also shifted. And I see the new thing that's coming. And he comes from, in a sense, old tradition. But his leader was Martin Buber, who emphasized an I and thou, which was wonderful addition philosophically for me. But in his book, he writes, 4th, particularly in Buddhist setting, talking about Southeast Asia, in my context, Cambodia, there is ambivalence in attitude toward authority, an ambivalence to be overcome only if superiors show merit by being, however strong, benevolent and indulgent father surrogates. So that's what Cambodia people that's what they're looking for. If you want to be authoritative, then you better be a good father. It's the kind of unwritten expectation. Eisenstadt's argument about patron playing the role of benevolent and indulgent father surrogate, particularly in Cambodia, is more normal than an exception. Chan, also a Cambodian scholar, also observed that in Cambodia, like those of all across Southeast Asia, its social relationships are hierarchical in nature, even from the family environment. And the current system of patron-client relationship in Cambodia is identical to kinship. Moses is aware of such hierarchical personal relationship between him and KBS pastors as father to children. Since during 2013 interview, Moses himself mentions his role as a father 15 times. Also from the interview data from mission house stage pastors, Moses being PAF or patroness father is evident. First interview with SK defines Moses' nurturing role as, we just like children, always take milk from mother, referring to Moses. Provision for his ministry as a benevolent father. Second, both BT and LN, married couple who graduated from KBS, consider Moses and his wife Grace as their parents and share a story about how Moses and Grace got involved with their marriage ceremony from beginning to help them even more than their own parents. Third, during interview with Kokong, is the one area in Cambodia, pastor's interview, AM, TK, SM, all these people basically said, these are our father. And the point here is that in all cases, Moses playing the role of father, hierarchically superior and unequal to the role of children, was not viewed or received negatively. So it was just part of the relationship. Matter of fact, one of the missionaries, part of the OMF, after living there for many years, realized that the whole Western sentiment of equality, of being friends with Cambodians, is more idealistic than real. As he argues, even Cambodians feel more secure in hierarchical relationships than by calling missionaries teacher instead of friend. And for us to insist that, no, you're my friend, is in a sense violating their culture and said, no, I don't want to be your friend. I want you to stay as my teacher because I feel more comfortable there. So my argument then is that the conflict between Korean missionaries and Cambodian led me to research the whole anthropological concept of patron-client relationship. In this paper, I argue that maybe missionary playing the role of father at especially the initial stage of their mission effort should not be viewed negatively or be criticized by certain social contract-based capitalistic model of mission. And that's my argument. And then I suggest that Moses' role as father represents a unique paradigm that offers alternative way of understanding hierarchical inequality, not only as negative, but also as a personal and intimate relationship of father and child relationship, which was very helpful, in my view, of the KBS church planting, which they planted 21 churches, and they're still not self-sustaining, but they are surviving and sustaining as a church. And the word out of Moses, when I criticized him, I said, why aren't any of these churches self-sustainable? And they said, Bob, I'm just so thankful that they are still there, sharing the gospel. That, these are English-speaking Khmer. They could get $500-$600 job, but they're only paid $120, and they've been doing it for 15 years. I don't criticize them. I'm just thankful because most of these people would have left and joined NGO and take $500-$600 job. I'm just so thankful. It was the voice of a father to children, and showing up like I got proud children, and they're can your children do that? Can your agency and they offer a job of 500 versus 150? Would they still stick with you and do? So in that moment, I realized, well, he is father, and he has right to, and maybe then it may be another paradigm. I don't know how we could incorporate that, but that's as far as my research reached at this point. Thank you.
And you finished on time.